Hi there, it's time for my first Commodore 64 compilation review of the year, and this one's taken a while to put together because, to be honest, there's a lot of games on this compilation, and the compilation I'm going to be looking at is Softaid. Now, this was published in 1985 by August Press Software in association with the Band-Aid Trust, and it was designed to raise money or aid for the Ethiopian famine victims. Of course, that was a very famous crisis that was occurring in the mid-80s, and the Band-Aid single Do They Know It's Christmas kind of kicked off the fundraising exercise for that, and this followed that trait. So there's 10 games on this compilation, each one from a different publisher. They all donated their games in this fundraising effort. So let's check out the compilation, looking at the packaging first, of course, and then play the 10 games. So something a little bit different with this compilation that I wouldn't normally do is I'm going to take a look at the cassette first, and there's a reason for that. So there's the cassette. You can see it says Softaid, Feed the World on it, lots of other information. The main thing it says at the bottom here is, please do not make unauthorised copies of this tape. It's an attempt by those involved to help the Bob Geldof Band-Aid Ethiopian Appeal Fund alleviate one of the world's worst natural disasters. Each tape sold will feed the hungry, so if you want a copy, go out and buy one. And the other reason I'm looking at this first is because it contains a copy of the song, the Do You Know It's Christmas song, on each side before the 5 games on each side are recorded. So what I'm going to do is put that into this cassette player, good old retro cassette player here, and I'll pop that in there and play a bit of that in the background while I look at the packaging, which is why I've looked at the cassette first. I can't get it in there at the moment. I'll do that in a second. But yeah, so this will probably result in a copyright strike, I imagine, but to be honest, if I'm going to get a copyright strike for anything, it may as well be to give money to a charity single, which presumably still raises some money for that charity or some appeal fund somewhere. So anyway, yeah, I'm going to get that started and then I'll take a look at the packaging. Okay, so the music's playing. Hopefully you can hear it in the background. I haven't got it on too high a volume because you do still need to hear me speak over the top of it. So anyway, here's the packaging. As you can see, it says Softaid on it, and it's got a pretty bleak looking picture of a very emaciated Ethiopian person drawn on the front of it and a desert in the background. It's not the most appealing cover, it has to be said. Obviously it was serving a purpose, it was a bit of shock value, but looking at it now, it's pretty bleak. And on the spine it also says Softaid and nothing else really, and on the back it just says features the Band-Aid single Do They Know It's Christmas, which, as you know, is playing right now on the tape recorder. Yeah, so that's it for the outside of the packaging. There's no list of what the games are on it, no screenshots, no real information at all, so it's pretty basic. So then moving inside, it's a pretty comprehensive inlay in as much as it's got instructions for each of the games. I haven't even mentioned what the games are yet, so let's go through that in a moment. In fact, okay, so it's got some information. For the organiser wish to thank the following companies and authors for the titles included in this compilation. So the list of all the publishers there, and a bit more information about where it's duplicated and kind of boring stuff like that. So then it says, if you have a tape counter on your cassette, set it to 0, find the required program, etc. Loading instructions, you know the idea. And then it's got the list of the games with some brief instructions for each one. And it did have some tape counter numbers which have been crossed out by a previous owner of this compilation, and different ones have been put in. Probably neither of them would be right for my data set. So as you can see, the games included are Gumshoe, Beamrider, oh, dropped the inlay almost there, this is going well so far. So yeah, Star Trader, Gyropod, China Miner, and then it goes on to side 2 and we've got Kokotoni Wilf, if that's how you pronounce that, Gilligan's Gold, Fred, Falcon Patrol and Flak. So those are the 10 games that are included on the compilation, each one from a different publisher. There are brief instructions for each of them, not really a lot of background. Obviously trying to fit the instructions for 10 games on a single cassette size inlay is going to be a bit tricky, so there's not generally a lot of background information, but it does have the controls and some basic instructions for each game. So it's not the best inlay or packaging, to be perfectly honest, but it did the job at the time, and obviously I guess it was meant to be produced on a budget to some extent, to save money, and so that the money that was paid for it could go to the charity. So there we go, that's the packaging. There are 10 games on the compilation to look at, but before that there was also an advert for it published in many of the magazines of the time, so let's take a look at that. As you can see, the advert used the same artwork as the packaging for the compilation, and seeing this image blown up, I noticed that there's also a baby in the arms of the emaciated Ethiopian, as if it couldn't get any more bleak. The advert confirms that the compilation consists of 10 top titles on cassette for only $4.99 and features the hit single Do They Know It's Christmas. You can see that the compilation was released for the Spectrum and Commodore 64 and had a different set of games for each system. Looking at the list of Spectrum games, I'd say that version probably had some higher quality ones than the Commodore 64, with games like Spellbound, Ant Attack and Sorcery being high quality offerings for the Specky. There are two games that are shared between the compilation for both systems, namely Kokotoni Wilf, which is described as Kokotoni Wolf on this advert, and also Gilligan's Gold. On the list of C64 games, there is one noteworthy change. It seems that Pitfall was originally going to be the offering from Activision on the compilation, but as I've already noted, it was replaced by Beamrider. Not sure about the reasons for that. It may have been due to the amount of space available on the tape, or perhaps Activision had second thoughts about allowing Pitfall to be on the compilation, it being one of their top tier games at that point. Personally, I think Beamrider, which they included instead, is a better game than Pitfall anyway, so it wouldn't have bothered me too much. At the bottom of the advert, it says that the compilation is available from multiple retailers and specialist computer stores, and all proceeds go to the Bob Geldof Band-Aid Ethiopian Appeal. It's a pretty simple advert, but it obviously does the job, and the main thing that stands out is that you can get 10 games for £5, which is what's going to make it most appealing for anyone looking at this advert. Presumably the advertising space for this compilation was given free of charge by the many magazines of the time, and as a result you can find it in almost all of them for many months. Let's now take a look at those 10 games then, and the first of them is Gumshoe, originally released by A&F Software in 1984. You take on the role of a private detective and have been asked to rescue the daughter of a millionaire. Your investigation has brought you to a complex of 10 tower blocks, and you have to navigate the various floors of the block to find the girl using ladders, escalators which change direction every few seconds, and elevators that move up and down various levels. There are also rubbish chutes which when entered transport you to another part of the block. On each floor there are doors that bad guys appear from and try to shoot you. You must avoid them or shoot them back, and if a bad guy touches you then you end up fighting him with only a 50% chance of winning. You're unable to jump, but you can duck any bullets fired at you, and there are trapdoors that allow you to drop down to the level below. You can't fall more than one level though, as you'll lose a life. When you lose one of your 5 lives, an expenditure sheet appears. You start the game with $500 and will lose money for every bullet fired or for losing a fight, but you make money for killing bad guys and receive a bonus for finding a girl on each level. This elevator action clone has fairly primitive graphics and sound, but to be fair they were pretty standard for the first few years of C64 releases. What the game does have is nice presentation with a detailed title screen, high score table and in-game instructions. The controls are reasonably good as your character reacts quickly to changing direction, ducking and firing. That's essential as there are enemies constantly spawning from all directions and you need to eliminate them before they can start firing at you. The levels are large and scroll in multiple directions, but progress in the game can be slow as you have to backtrack to avoid enemies and wait around for elevators to arrive or escalators to go the right direction. The rubbish chutes offer some randomisation and can act as shortcuts or escape routes, but I found they usually move you further down the tower, so are rarely worth the risk. It is especially annoying to get caught in a fight by baddies and have a 50-50 chance of losing a life, and it's very frustrating to be sent all the way back to the start of a level if you do die. I did however like the balance sheet method of scoring that you see when you lose a life, which encourages you to avoid fights and use as few bullets as possible. Ultimately though, once you've beaten the first stage you'll find the game is repetitive and quite dull, with nothing new to see on later levels other than a more complex layout. Combine that with the frustrations I've already mentioned and I don't think this is one you'd play too many times before giving up. Next up we have Activision's contribution to the compilation, Beamrider, which was originally released in 1984. A huge beam matrix is formed within the vicinity of your home planet, and beamer ships are at this very moment launching an attack. Your mission is to infiltrate the matrix and annihilate all enemy craft. Your vessel appears at the bottom of the screen, and there are 7 different types of ship to be dealt with, which are introduced as the game progresses. The most important are the white saucers. 15 of these must be destroyed before you can proceed to the next level. You must also be careful to avoid the indestructible kamikaze craft. Yellow rejuvenators appear once per stage, and contact with these adds another ship to your reserve, but if they're shot, the burning debris hurtles towards you and contact with it is fatal. When 15 saucers have been eliminated, you must attempt to destroy the mothership, which is guarded by a swarm of green suicide craft. You're equipped with 3 energy torpedoes per stage. A direct hit from a torpedo causes the mothership to explode, and a bonus is awarded according to the level number and the number of ships you have remaining in reserve. I've reviewed Beamrider on my channel before, as it was re-released in Firebird's Silver range. It's an excellent old school arcade style single screen twitch shooter. It has a near perfect difficulty curve, with early levels being quite easy, but things get more challenging as more complex and dangerous enemies are gradually introduced. The graphics are very simple and blocky, but they do serve the purpose quite well. The sounds are primitive too, but the background pulsing noise cleverly increases attention, getting faster as the game gets harder. There are some good scoring mechanics, with more points being awarded on later levels for destroying the mothership. There's also an element of risk-reward for trying to grab the ship that gives an extra life on each stage, which helps increase your chances of making a little more progress too. Like many early Activision games, it may not look like much, but the game is well designed and addictive, and has more depth and requirement for strategy than it may first appear. Up next is Star Trader, originally released by Bug-Byte Software in 1984. In a distant galaxy there's a star system containing 8 planets, in which profits could be made trading between them. That was until space pirates came along and robbed or killed the traders on their routes, and now all the traders have given up or left the system. You're the only trader left and have the opportunity to trade between all 8 planets. You begin the game in a starport on planet 0 and can see a graphical representation of where you are and many options for how to spend your time. You can visit traders and buy or sell goods, visit the general store to buy weapons for your ship or food, or go to a bar or hotel for food and rest. The traders are only open at specific times of day, so sometimes you must wait for them to open. You must eat and drink at regular intervals and also buy enough food for any journeys in your starship. Once you've traded and looked after yourself, you can then depart to another planet. The view changes to inside your ship with a first person perspective looking outside the cockpit. You can move the ship, but it will keep its course for the chosen planet. Occasionally you'll encounter space pirates who will demand a large amount of credits for safe passage. You can decide to pay them or fight, and if you choose the latter then you'll see the pirates outside your cockpit and must attempt to blast them all. If you make it safely to the new planet then you have to deal with customs. You can declare your goods and pay a fee, lie and hope not to get caught, or bribe the customs official. You then enter the starport and can trade, eat and rest as before, also repairing your ship if needed. At any point you can get a status report of your current financial situation, stock of tradable items, and also see the current prices for items on the planet. The Commodore 64 version of the game allows 8 players, with each player taking a couple of turns before the next player has theirs. I'll start with a positive point about this game. It has some very detailed instructions in-game before you start, explaining the aim and all the significant controls. Speaking of which, you can use a joystick in the flight sequences, but otherwise the majority of input is via the keyboard. The overall presentation of the game is quite ugly, with locations slowly drawn on the screen, often hard to read text, and the stereotypical brown border. It tends to be really slow to display and select from the options, and you frequently have to press a key to move screens on. The music is initially okay, but soon becomes an infuriating dirge once you've been playing for 10 to 15 minutes. Progress in the game is also slow, as traders and the spaceport are frequently closed, so you just have to wait around until they open. In the meantime, you have to spend money on food and lodging on the planet, otherwise you get too tired to fly. This just sees you wasting credits as you're forced to wait, and there are lots of unavoidable expenses like food, customs duty, and even buying a pint every time you enter a pub. I'm not really sure how you ever make any money, as it seems that all the items you can trade cost more than you can sell them for on any of the planets. There is probably some strategy involved there that I didn't play the game long enough to find out. Once you can finally get off a planet, the space travel sequence is quite well done, with a good cockpit view, fair controls and a nice if blocky 3D effect. It does go on a bit too long though when there's no action and can't be skipped. Eventually you'll end up in a battle with space pirates, but this is also long-winded as you have to eliminate a large number of samey looking ships. You must avoid their missiles and try to get your own on target, and there are lots of misses with no proper targeting crosshairs. The concept for this game isn't bad and it's quite ambitious, presumably designed as a competitor to Elite. Sadly, it's way too laborious to play without making any kind of noteworthy progress, and soon becomes boring as a result.
The fourth game on the compilation is Kokotoni Wilf, originally released by Elite Systems in 1984. For reasons that aren't fully explained until the end of the game, Ulrich the Magician requires a dragon amulet which has been broken into many pieces and scattered across time and space. Ulrich is too old to undertake the task himself, and so he sends his assistant Kokotoni Wilf on the mission instead. He's given Wilf magical wings to assist him on his quest. The player must guide Wilf through a series of 6 levels set in different historical eras in search of the pieces of the amulet. When all the pieces in a level have been collected, a time gate will open, allowing Wilf to travel to the next era. The journey begins amid dinosaurs in ancient prehistory and ends amid spaceships and robots in the year 2001. Wilf cannot jump but can fly using his wings. He cannot kill enemies so must evade them, and some environmental obstacles will also cost him a life. The game features mostly single colour graphics that are quite crude, but there is nice animation on the wings of the player sprite and lots of variety in both enemies and landscape. The music on the title screen is absolutely horrible, but the in-game tune is okay, though the choice of Consider Yourself from Oliver is a weird one. In addition to the music, you also get sound effects, so that's a positive. Control of Wilf is quite precise, but it is annoying that he never seems to stay still. Gameplay relies on good timing and quick reactions to collect the items, and I found it was best to tackle many screens head on rather than hanging about, though knowing that only comes with trial and error. There is a lot of inconsistency in what kills you. It's mostly only moving objects, but then there are some static landscape ones that wipe you out on some screens. Many of them are pretty easy to navigate, but others are very tough, and some have enemies that will kill you as soon as you enter the screen until you know how to avoid them. It is therefore very much a memory test, which can get frustrating. You're not awarded any score in the game, so just playing for progression, and persistence will reward you with that. The idea of moving through different periods of history does give this one some replayability, but eventually you'll get killed off on a new screen, and once you've lost all your lives you have to start from the very beginning, so it will get more annoying the more you play. Being able to restart on the last era you visited would have improved the game, but this game was way too early for the idea of checkpoints, to be honest. Kokotoni Wilf is not without its plus points, but in the end it just feels like another one of those early 8-bit computer games that is designed to frustrate more than entertain. Rounding off side 1 of the cassette is the 5th game, China Miner, originally released by Interceptor Software in 1984. In this platform game you play Wally, the only person to know the location of the jade mines belonging to the Pong dynasty in China. On each of the 30 screens you must pick up certain objects before collecting a key to move on to the next level. As well as platforms to negotiate, you must also avoid the various creatures that populate the mine. If you make contact with any of them, then you lose one of 5 lives and the screen resets. Falling from heights also costs you a life. There are also various environmental obstacles to be wary of, such as lasers and platforms that disintegrate when stepped on. I always try to at least be constructive in my criticism in these game reviews, but this one really is going to be a struggle. The presentation is okay, with a simple title screen and a high score table. The graphics are colourful and quite well animated for the time, and the background music is quite well done, but does ultimately get annoying. That's it for the vague positives. This game has some of the most sadistic gameplay I've ever encountered. If you hesitate for even 1 second at the start of the very first level, then you won't be able to jump over the first enemy and will die. This isn't helped by the fact that you have to press the spacebar to start from the title screen rather than fire, so that split second you waste moving your hand back to the joystick means you're on the back foot immediately. The controls are infuriating. Jumping can only be done when pushing in a direction on the stick as well, which takes some getting used to, and you have to be positioned perfectly on ladders to go up or down them. Any missed timing of the controls and you'll almost certainly end up losing a life and being sent right back to the start. Pixel perfect jumping is often needed to get from one platform to another, and you can't fall any distance at all without it costing a life. The game has infuriating trial and error gameplay right from the start. It will probably take 10 or more attempts to work out how to get past the second enemy on stage 1. After that, the rest of the level is actually relatively easy, though there is a jump onto a dissolving platform that sometimes seems to kill you for no obvious reason. If you do persevere enough to get past the first level, the second one is even harder, and that's where I gave up. There is an almost innumerable number of these single screen platform collect 'em ups from this era, and this is possibly the most difficult of them all. The coder and publishers clearly had no concept of a difficulty curve or even playtesting by the looks of it, and it's just horrendous to play. It has the kind of gameplay that means persistence would probably pay off eventually, but you do also need a bit of luck, and to be honest, why bother when there are much better games of this type out there? It's that time again where I say thank you to all my channel members, whose names you can see here in my Supporters Hall of Fame. If you're enjoying this video and would like to join these fine folks and support my efforts, why not become a member yourself? For a monthly fee starting from just 99p, you can get access to the special membership perks shown on screen, and more besides. If you're interested, then please click on the join button below this video for more information. If you're not able to commit to a monthly contribution but would still like to support my channel, then you could also give a super thanks. This one-off donation gives you a highlighted comment on whichever video you choose to click the button on, and anyone doing this will also get a shout out from me on a subsequent video. The super thanks button can be found below every video I produce. You can also help raise the profile of this channel by liking this video and leaving a comment, which helps improve my ranking in the mysterious YouTube algorithm. Any support you can give, financial or otherwise, is greatly appreciated. The next game on the compilation is Gilligan's Gold, originally released by Ocean Software in 1984. In this multi-screen platform game, you must help Gilligan collect all the bags of gold and evade the desperate outlaw. You must grab one bag of gold at a time and place it onto your wheelbarrow before the timer runs out. You start with 4,000 time units, and when you deposit a bag, any remaining time is added to your score and the timer is reset to 4,000. You must beware of the outlaws that are after you and the gold. You can avoid them by jumping onto the trucks or escape via the ladders and lifts, but watch out for the mine shafts, which are deep and deadly. You can also stun the outlaws momentarily by grabbing a pickaxe to hit them with, or by dropping the gold bags on them. This is a clone of the arcade game Bagman, which to be honest is not a game I've ever paid much attention to. Initial signs are impressive, with a nice Wild West style title screen animation sequence with music, which looks great but has little to do with the actual game. Once you get into the game itself, the graphics are plain but functional, and the music doesn't really fit the theme. Playing it is also quite underwhelming, as your character's movement is sluggish even without carrying a bag, and there's an awful lot of waiting for baddies to move out of the way or elevators to reach your floor. The 3 interconnected screens offer a pretty large environment to move around, but you have no idea when a bad guy or minecart is going to appear and cause you to lose a life, so you have to be really careful at the edges of the screen. There's also some ropey collision detection, making it hard to complete actions like putting bags in the wheelbarrow, grabbing hooks to allow you to get onto the cart, and even just moving the barrow. Another bugbear is that when you enter the 3rd screen, the elevator immediately starts going down, leaving you stranded at the top and at the mercy of an enemy that could appear from the adjacent screen at any time. I never got close to completing a level of this game. It's too hard right from the start, with too many different things to contend with. If the first screen had had a simpler layout and no immediate threat to the player, it would have been more accessible. In essence, I think the concept for the game is decent, but the execution of this version is average at best. Next up we have Fred, originally released in the UK by Quicksilver in 1984. Notice how nearly all these games originally came out in 1984. You are Fred, an intrepid archaeologist, interested in visiting the Pyramid of Tutankhamun in search of treasures and great adventures. The game consists of 6 levels in which you must obtain treasures and objects that allow you to leave the labyrinthine pyramid alive. To complete each level you must locate 3 objects, one of which is a bomb that you must use to blow up the door at the end of the stage to gain access to the next one. You must avoid dangerous acid drops, mummies, spiders and more. In order to defend yourself from these enemies you have a gun with limited bullets, but some enemies are indestructible and you must avoid them. I'd never played this game on the C64 before, but I am familiar with the Amstrad version, which was slightly redesigned as Roland on the Ropes. Presentation in this version is good, with a nice title screen, a choice of difficulty levels and an overview of all the significant game objects. The graphics in the game are quite simple, mostly single colour affairs, but they do have some charm and the multicoloured main character sprite is cute, though the animation of him is limited. The background tune is an odd mix of Don't Forsake Me O My Darling and When the Saints Go Marching In. It's incredibly short at around 20 seconds and does get annoying, but it can be turned off. There are also in-game sound effects, though they are very simple. Although it looks like a platformer, this is actually more of a maze game. You have to collect the 3 key items per stage, find the exit, then repeat with a larger, more complex layout. The main hazard is the acid drips, which are all over the place. You have to judge when to pass them to avoid losing health, and you'll end up running into them frequently, especially when getting off the ropes. Once you judge when to move to avoid them, the game does become easier. The scrolling is quite jerky, especially when going up and down stairs, and you can often run into enemies as they move quickly onto the screen from the opposite side. It's also quite hard to react to enemies in time to shoot them, so they can drain a lot of your health. On that note, I thought the health bar was weird, starting red and turning yellow as you lose energy. It didn't seem intuitive at all. You only have one life, but there are occasional health boosters to be found. There are quite a few collectibles and other ways to score points, but you don't get a very high score for all your efforts. The game is definitely playable, and I did have several tries, but it does get quite repetitive. The random placement of items does add a little bit of replayability, I suppose, but the basic aim is the same from one stage to the next, so I don't think it really stands out as anything special. The next game is Flak, originally released in the UK by US Gold in, you guessed it, 1984. In the year 2096, a huge rogue computer is trying to take over the universe, and you've been tasked to fly your AGX hypersonic fighter and bomb flak batteries and other defences to reach the fortress containing the computer and destroy it. The game is a vertically scrolling shoot 'em up where you control your ship with a joystick, and with the sight in front of you, you must bomb various buildings and defences that are trying to destroy you. I'm starting to sound like a stuck record here, but this is another game that initially gives off good vibes, with a very nice title screen backed with music, a variety of game options and a high score table. In-game, the graphics are basic looking but colourful, and the scrolling is smooth. Sound-wise, they're just simple in-game effects for shots and explosions. The game is essentially a clone of the arcade game Xevious, but without the airborne enemies. You just shoot ground-based targets that spew bullets at you. Yes, the coders of this game managed to take the concept of the already dull Xevious and make it even more boring. Your targeting reticule is reasonably accurate, and you can auto-fire by holding down the fire button, but it somehow seems harder to hit enemies when you use it. Your ship is huge and cumbersome, so it's a pretty easy target for enemy fire, and it's often hard to see the red enemy shots against some background colours. Enemies can shoot from behind you after you've passed them too, when it's impossible to destroy them. If you miss a few enemies, then the game becomes a case of dodging fire until you get some clear space to reset yourself for the next wave of targets. The second water-based phase is ridiculously hard, as shots come from random places in the water, so you can't guess where to aim for until they've fired at you, so the screen soon fills up with bullets. It is good that you restart from a checkpoint after losing a life, but every time that happens, your ship takes off from the start and scrolls to the restart point. It's a nice idea to begin with, but it soon gets boring watching the screen scroll past all the ground you've already covered, and sometimes you're respawned in a spot where you can get killed almost immediately. Flak is fairly well programmed and presented, but it's a very boring clone of an already boring game in my view. The penultimate game on the compilation is Gyropod, released by Taskset in 1984. The player controls a spaceship, the Galaxy Ranger, and the mission is to destroy every planet in an alien system. The ship consists of a supply pod which docks at the start of the level with a Ranger-class rim. The player must move a mobile cannon around the rim to target alien craft and avoid incoming fire. As the battle progresses, the rim takes damage and holes begin to appear in it. If the gun is either shot or hit by an incoming spaceship, it is knocked off the rim and a life is lost. The space battles consume ammunition, so the player must plunder each planet before destroying it. When a number of enemies have been destroyed, an alert will sound and a left-left-right joystick sequence causes the supply pod to detach from the rim and head towards the planet, where the player must successfully land the supply pod on the surface. Having made a successful landing, the pilot of the pod disembarks and the player directs him to collect boxes from the surface of the planet. The aliens are understandably hostile and will pursue and shoot the spaceman if they can. Successfully departing the planet returns you to the rim, and the sequence continues until the planet has been plundered and can be destroyed. When I first loaded this up, by default you only have one life and it seemed impossible. It turns out that there are lots of options though, including 3 levels of difficulty, and the number of lives can be set from 1 to 8. I decided to up the lives to 5 to actually give me some chance of making progress. As well as all the options, the presentation is of a high standard, with a good title screen, pretty detailed instructions and an excessively large high score table. The graphics are generally okay, with a mixture of single colour enemy ships and more detailed backgrounds. The gyro ring thing that your cannon sits on is good, and moving around it is fairly well implemented, though the cannon sprite is a little juddery. The music is also okay, though it does drone on a bit, but the sound effects are decent enough for this kind of game. The The gameplay is unfortunately very convoluted and hard to master. Sometimes it seems you can launch the pod, sometimes not. Landing it is quite tricky, and collecting all 3 supply boxes from the planet's surface seems impossible. On the initial space combat screen, you've got to deal with the onslaught of enemies, running out of ammo and the ring getting too damaged. Avoiding enemy shots can be hard, as sometimes they come when the ships are right on top of you and you're unable to avoid them. It also seems inconsistent whether your shots actually destroy enemies or not. I had quite a few tries at this one, and one time I somehow managed to destroy the first planet. No idea how that happened. I then moved on to the next stage, which was just the same thing but faster and more difficult. The concept of Gyropod is original, and the different screens and objectives add some variety, but there's almost too much going on and it seems very hard to make any progress, so I'd sum it up as being ambitious but flawed. The 10th and final game on the compilation is Falcon Patrol, originally published by Virgin Games in 1983. As the last surviving pilot of the Falcon Patrol squadron, the player needs to fend off waves of hostile jets with his fighter to avoid the bombing of 6 airfields. These airfields are needed to refill your jet's limited supply of ammunition and fuel in the short breaks between attacks. A radar display in the lower middle of the screen shows the position of the hostiles and the undamaged airfields that are left. After every 6 waves of attacks, the number of enemies per wave rises by 1 and the breaks between the attacks get shorter. This game's a neat real-world twist on the Defender concept, with a 2-way horizontally scrolling wraparound environment. The graphics for the landscape are smart, with a decent 3D effect, while the planes are simple single-colour sprites. The scrolling is fast and smooth, which is vital for this kind of game. The game begins with a fueling and arming sequence before you can take off, and that does get tiresome as it's repeated every time you lose a life. It would have been better if it only happened once when the game first starts. Once you get into the air, the control and movement of your plane is good, though turning it around is quite slow. It can be annoying when engaging enemies head on and they crash into you really quickly. The best strategy is to approach them from behind, but if you're attacking from the front, it's better to approach them slowly and then turn around after they've gone past. The need to refuel and rearm after every few waves is a neat concept and has to be timed correctly, so that adds some strategy to what is otherwise a fairly straightforward blasting game. The game is nicely made, but gameplay is repetitive and there are a few niggles. However, I did get into it the more I played, so it does have an addictive quality about it. That does it for my review of the 10 games in the Softaid compilation, and that was quite a mixed bag of games with a variety of platformers, shooters and even a space trading simulation. I don't think anyone would disagree that you got plenty for your fiver, and given the cause it was raising money for, you'd be hard pressed to argue against buying it back in 1985. 40 years on though, the quality of the games can definitely be brought into question, so let's round things up by giving each of them a score out of 10 before rating the compilation as a whole. Kicking things off was Gumshoe, and on the face of it this is a reasonable elevator action clone, but once you've played through a few levels it doesn't really have enough to keep you coming back, and there are a couple of hugely frustrating aspects to the gameplay. I'm going to give this one 5 out of 10. Beamrider is one of Activision's many classics from the early 80s. Its crude looking graphics initially may put you off, but the gameplay is top notch, and it's comfortably the best game in this collection, scoring 8 out of 10 from me. Star Trader was an ambitious idea that is unfortunately somewhat ugly to look at and tiresome to play. I suspect there's a lot of game here if you're willing to persist, but I don't know why anyone would want to. I'm giving it a score of 4. Kokotoni Wilf is an interesting time-travelling collectible with an unusual main player character and some fiendish level design. It's let down by some screens where cheap deaths are too easy to come by, stopping you from making fair progress and ultimately becoming annoying. I'm going to score this one 5 out of 10. China Miner is not a bad looking game for its time, but the sadistic difficulty level and dubious controls mean it's no fun at all to play. It's the worst game on this compilation and it gets a score of 3 from me. Gilligan's Gold is another platform collectible that initially seems like it might be fun, but eventually just gets on your nerves by putting you in scenarios that make losing lives inevitable. It's another one I'm going to score 5 out of 10. Fred is a reasonably fun game with an endearing main character and challenging level design. There's nothing really wrong with it, but it doesn't stand out in any way either, so it gets a score of 6. Flak is a pretty blatant Xevious clone that manages to be even more boring than the game that inspired it. 4 out of 10 for this one. Gyropod has a unique and inventive concept with its blend of shooting and collecting up action, but there's just a little too much going on and the high difficulty level doesn't help either. It's another one I'm going to give 5. And finally, Falcon Patrol is a neat real-world spin on the Defender concept, with nice presentation and some strategic elements to complement the blasting action. It rounds the compilation off on a relative high with a score of 7 out of 10. I'll now move on to the overall compilation rating, and as usual I'll start with the packaging. This was obviously designed to be produced cheaply, so I can forgive the single cassette case and 10 games crammed onto one tape. However, looking at it now and comparing it to other compilations I've reviewed, the outer packaging lacks any kind of useful information about the games and has some really bleak artwork, which I accept was there for a good reason. The instructions are just about adequate for most of the games, but overall this does not compare well to the majority of compilations, so I'm scoring it 5 out of 10. The average score for the 10 games comes out at 5.2, so that just leaves value for money. I may not personally have been too impressed with most of the games in this package, but at the time, the chance to get 10 titles that would have originally retailed for £6 to £10 each, plus a copy of the excellent Band-Aid single, and raise money for a very worthy cause in the process means this was well worth the £5 asking price, and I have no qualms about giving it a value for money score of 10 out of 10. Crunching all those numbers, that means that the overall compilation rating for Softaid comes out at 61%. With so much coverage of the compilation in the gaming press back in 1985, you'd think there'd be plenty of reviews of it, but I could only find one for the C64 edition, and that's from the July issue of Your Commodore magazine, so let's see what they thought of it. It doesn't really get a lot of space, with all 10 games covered in just a single column review. In the box art at the very top, you can see that it's awarded 4 out of 5 stars, so not much suspense there. The review then begins by saying there can be few people unaware of the success Band-Aid has had in raising money for the people of Ethiopia. Softaid is the computer industry's answer to Bob Geldof, and is a collection of 10 top games from some of Britain's foremost software houses. It then goes on to say it comes in the usual cassette box with a larger than average inlay card to carry all the game's instructions. There's not nearly enough information, but then again there are 10 games to cover and you can't get War and Peace onto a postage stamp. So the same criticism that I was levelling, that the instructions are a little bit lacking. After a little bit of information about the Band-Aid single, the review then says on loading the games I was a little dismayed to find that 3 titles would not load. Even after many attempts I still haven't seen Gumshoe, but one failure can almost be overlooked. It then says of the other 9 there are 4 arcade shoot 'em ups, 2 mazy types, 2 platform level games and 1 semi-adventure called Star Trader. None of the titles are particularly new, but all are good solid games, no rubbish, and if bought separately each could command an £8 price tag and you wouldn't feel cheated. I definitely disagree with the observation that there's no rubbish, but again I am looking at it 40 years on when a lot better games have been published for the C64. The reviewer's personal favourite is Activision's Beamrider, a really good old-fashioned joystick basher, so he's got good taste there, but then he says his other favourite is Flak by US Gold, so I'm not so sure now. They also say that Gilligan's Golden Star Trader are also worth a mention, all the rest deserve a mention as well, this tape is too good to be true, but then he doesn't mention them. He rounds off by saying given better instructions and if all games had loaded, this tape would receive 5 stars, but still, nobody should be without this compilation. And again, as I've said, I don't think you could argue that it was a great bundle back then, so I do agree with that assessment. Whatever I think about it now, this was an excellent package that rightly sat at the top of the software charts for months after its release in 1985. As for where it sits in my compilation league table, well let's take a look at the full price rankings first, and unfortunately it just misses out on featuring the chart at all because 61% doesn't get it into the top 12. There is perhaps an argument as to whether this should have been classed as a budget compilation, given that it only costs £4.99 for 10 games. However, my classification for a budget compilation is it has to cost £4 or less and be released by one of the main budget publishers like Codemasters, Zeppelin or Alternative Software, and at the time Softaid was released there wasn't really even the concept of budget publishers for the most part. It's a bit of a shame because it would have easily featured in the budget compilation league table, but sadly rules are rules. Moving on to the combined compilation rankings, well obviously it doesn't feature in that league table either because that's predominantly full price compilations anyway. That does it for this edition of the Commodore 64 Compilation Comparison, except for me to ask the usual question, what do you guys think of the Softaid compilation and the 10 titles it contains? Did you buy it back in 1985 or have you played it since, and what do you think about my ratings of the 10 games? Let me know in the comments. After working through this monster collection of 10 games and not really enjoying many of them, next time around I'll be moving on to a much smaller compilation. It's going to be a budget collection from Codemasters, chosen by my channel members. That'll be coming along in about a month's time, and until then there'll be plenty of other retro gaming content on my channel, so please stay tuned. Thanks very much for watching this video, and until the next time, see ya!